Mr. Vint Cerf. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to join you. I apologize that I wasn't able to join sooner. I had another conference call that actually overlaps with this one. So I'm sorry to have missed some of the beginning, but I was able to catch some of what Ravi was saying. I want to endorse a good deal of what he was trying to point out about the importance and value of privacy, but also the importance and value of being able to share information. There's an old expression, knowledge is power, and I've come to the belief that it's knowledge sharing that's power. We learned this, I think, from a great deal of the sharing that goes on the internet, even though some of the sharing we don't like because has invaded our privacy. So there's a tension there that I'm sure everyone is very conscious of. I did want to bring up one other interesting factoid, which I won't go into a great deal of detail on. But in this digital world, there is no guarantee that digital information survives. And anyone who's encountered 404 page not found will appreciate some of that. But you'll also appreciate it because your 5¼ inch floppies may not be readable because you don't have any equipment that knows how to read it. Or if you can read it, you don't know how to interpret the files because the software that used to know how to do that doesn't run on any operating system that you have available. So there's a digital preservation hazard here on top of everything else, but that's not the primary focus of today's discussions, except to say that if you do have a preservation ecosystem of some sort to try to keep data around so the 22nd century can know what the hell happened in the 21st, which is open to question, then you still have to keep in mind the question of privacy of that preserved data and how is that maintained and under what circumstances does it become available to the general public in the same way that copyright is finite and then after that it becomes public domain. So I thought I would spend my time on two things, technological privacy and policy, and see whether I can offer a few perspectives that would somehow enhance our discussion. I'm probably going to say the obvious, but sometimes it's important to do that. So I'm going to start out on the technical side with cryptography because we discovered that cryptography is an important potential component for protecting privacy. We also know that the current flavors of cryptography often will not survive in the event that quantum machines actually succeed in scaling up and attacking RSA or elliptic crypto codes. But there are post-quantum algorithms that have been approved and recommended by NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And so we should keep that in mind as we think about mechanisms for protecting privacy. There's another element in all of this, and that's what I'll call strong authentication. And here, there's a couple of reasons why this is so important. If you want to have privacy, but you're willing to grant some parties access to information, you need to know who they are with some degree of reliability. And that means strong authentication is your friend here. For the same reason that if you want access to something, uh, and parties are trying to protect privacy, then you have to be strongly authenticable in order to gain access. But that raises the next obvious question, though, and that has to do with authorization, because once you've strongly authenticated someone, that doesn't guarantee them authorization unless there's a binding of authorization with the strongly authenticated identity. These authorization controls apply not only to people, but they also apply to the things that are protected. So the protected device or the protected data needs to be able to say who's authorized to get access to it. And I'm sure over time you can see how that could change. The definition of who has access could be very individualized. It sounds to me like there might be someone with an open mic, and so I'm hearing just occasional little signals, just FYI. So we need to know who is authorized, and with the advent of AI agents, it's conceivable that we will have to give identity to the agents somehow. I know I'm giving a lot of thought to that, but it strikes me as being a potential hazard. So figuring out what to do with AI agents and how to authorize them to have access to things is going to be very important. especially if we want to launch them to go do things on our behalf. Which raises the next question, which is scaling. Imagine that you decide you want to have control over any attempt to access data that you wish to control access to. The last thing in the world you want is to be inundated with 100,000 requests for access on your mobile or some other signaling device. So now the question is how to automate that automated access or to reject access where it's inappropriate. And that raises another interesting question, whether AI agents could be our friend in terms of undertaking that responsibility, and how would we convince ourselves that the agents are actually competent to do that. If we are concerned that our technical efforts to protect access to controlled information is not guaranteed, and anyone who's had anything to do with computers will recognize that nothing is ever guaranteed, we're going to need some way of detecting an inappropriate access, which means audit trails have to be generated, and there has to be regular analysis of those audit trails in order to detect in a post hoc way an inappropriate access. So that means the design and implementation of systems for accessing information has to take that into account. And I'm pretty sure that hiding in some of what Ravi was saying are many of these observations. I'm feeling compelled to bring up the solid effort that Tim Berners-Lee has undertaken. I don't know a great deal about those protocols, and I don't know how far they've been implemented and to what degree they're in use. But my understanding of them is that there was an intent to deal with authentication and authorization in order to control access to information. And so they might be relevant to this discussion. There are other mechanisms that are sort of part of the familiar landscape, firewalls, for example, isolating one portion of a network from another. And in my world at Google, of course, our cloud services have to show with some degree of credibility that we can isolate our users from each other and from us. And in aid of that, we've introduced things like confidential computing that allow software and data to be encrypted until it actually lands on the processor that's assigned to do the work. The data gets processed, but before it leaves that machine, it gets re-encrypted in a key which is only known to the consumer or the customer and the computer itself. And Google doesn't have any access to that. I'm sure there are others who are also offering similar kinds of mechanisms, and they are all part of an attempt to protect privacy and to protect intellectual property. The last thing, this is not the last thing that could be on the list, it's just the last thing that happens to be on my list, is the notion of web alerts. I use Google Alerts a lot these days just to find out what's out there that I might care about that might have changed recently. And so that's turned out to be a very useful mechanism. More generally, I see the internet and the web as a mirror of our society. And if we don't like what's in the mirror, changing the mirror doesn't help. The real problem is our society and its behaviors, its norms and practices. And I'm not sure whether any of you would agree with me, but I think that we have somewhat lost some of the norms of our society that would protect privacy and respect it. We have a real problem with unenforceable norms that are adopted only voluntarily. And so it may very well be that we have to introduce other mechanisms to assure that these norms become enforceable policy, which takes me to the policy part of my intervention. And so these are just some observations which I hope might spike conversation and discussion. One thing is transparency. If we're relying on people or organizations and software to protect privacy, then we need transparency so that we know what's protected, how it's protected, and what are the disclosure practices of that organization. We need to know whether they intend to disclose content that we care about and to whom and for what purpose. As an opposite question, does anybody ever really read the terms and conditions that we click on in order to get something to happen? I confess to you that they are almost impenetrable when I do look at them, which is infrequent, I confess. But even if you read them and believe you understand them, we don't know whether or how well they are enforced. And so perhaps there's some work to be done to make the terms and conditions more apparent to users so they know what they're getting into when they click on I agree with your T's and C's. And that leads me to another issue which has to do with detection. The question is, how can you detect whether privacy has been breached? What mechanisms do we have for determining that? And of course, we see headlines all the time about day zero attacks, breaches of access control, exposing huge amounts of content, often very sensitive material like social security numbers, licenses, telephone numbers, passwords, and other kinds of health information and so on. And we just see this all the time, which tells us that our technologies are not serving us very well. They need to work better. Even if you have a clear statement of your intent to protect privacy, then there's the question about how do you enforce that? And this is not only the job of the organization that's asserting that it protects privacy, but it's also the responsibility of government organizations that have the authority to do audits and to demand disclosures to be able to examine the policies of an organization and its mechanisms for protecting privacy. The thing that I worry about is that the scale of all this is getting bigger and bigger. There are many, many, many exabytes of information in digital form out there in the net. And all of these mechanisms need attention, but the question is, can they be automated in order to deal with scale, which was the point that Ravi made in one of the last charts that he showed. Scaling is really a huge issue in this space because of the amount of digital information that's growing so rapidly every day. Then there is the problem of cross-border concerns for privacy protection, and that leads to questions about international agreements. Two examples that have come up in the recent past are the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime and the more recent Cybercrime Convention, which are both intended to try to deal with inappropriate behavior and what we will call criminal behavior, not all of which is just privacy invading, but many other kinds of criminal acts that are harmful. But we need those international agreements because the perpetrators of harmful acts may be in one jurisdiction and, of course, the victims in another. And in the absence of international agreements, it's not clear how you will hold parties accountable for their bad behavior. I wonder if I could just emphasize something about accountability here. I believe that our focus of attention on anonymity, which might be argued to be an aspect of privacy, is probably needs to be balanced by the need to hold parties accountable. And so I think even the veil of anonymity may need to be pierced from time to time under the right circumstances. We do this when we have whistleblowing lines that are supposed to be anonymous, but often the party to whom you blow the whistle has to validate who you are in order to gain credibility for whatever the testimony is, even though they're now compelled to keep that information private. And a number of journalists, for example, have gone to jail in order to protect the identity of their sources. But we will need some ability to hold parties accountable. On the other side of that, we have to give agency to people to protect themselves from various kinds of cyber harm, including invasion of privacy. So there is a yin and yang there. Accountability and agency have to be provided in comparable measure. I think the last point I wanted to make before I run out of time here is the notion of authorization to access something probably should not be indefinite. And so the idea of losing authorization on a periodic basis or having to reauthorize on a periodic basis is probably a good idea for protection. It's the same notion that causes credit cards to be expired. The idea is that even if someone gets access by having the ability, having gained authority, that authority will evaporate over a period of time, so that you have an opportunity to correct for potential hazards. It's certainly not perfect if the expiration is a year or two away, but it's a notion of reauthorization, deauthorization, and reauthorization to improve the likelihood that privacy will be protected. I think I'm basically out of time, so I appreciate the opportunity to lay these topics before you, and I'm eager to hear what happens next.
Thank you, Vint. It's very insightful. Thank you again. Any questions from the audience?
I
Go
have
ahead.
one question for Vint here. AI, of course, is a hot topic and it's becoming more embedded and integrated with our digital infrastructure. Are there any key principles you think that should be guiding governance with AI?
Yes, let me suggest that one of the critical elements of the AI that I suspect you're talking about, which is the large language models,
Mhm.
have to be trained using information from digital sources. And I think transparency is our friend here. I think it needs to be clear what information was used to train these systems so that it's apparent that privacy has been appropriately preserved. We get into a lot of debate about this, but I come back to a brief mention of copyright. um, in the original intent in the Constitution, copyright was only a 14-year thing, after which whatever it was became public domain. They included in those provisions another 14 years if you were still alive and you paid a fee to extend the copyright. Remember that when these were written, age 35 was considered kind of on the old side. so so another 14 years was sort of miraculous. Today, of course, the copyright laws allow for 75 years after the death of the author of the work, which I think is excessive. And it's interfering with the balance that I think Ravi mentioned or implied, which is that the benefit of sharing information is important to us and should be important to us. And we need to balance that against privacy concerns. I'm not arguing that we should share everything that we think is private, but we ought to go out of our way to figure out how to share information that could be very useful for our society to know and to train the AI agents with. But we need to have transparency as to what information was used to do that.
Awesome, thank you. I just saw another question pop up. Most big LLMs shared minimal data and metadata about the training data. What governance exists today around what all LLMs must disclose about training data?
So that's a really good question, and I do not have the answer to that. In fact, if anyone on the call does, it would be a benefit to all of us to hear what is already in place. I think this is likely to be the subject of considerable debate and discussion. What would be very useful, I think, would be to identify, to flip this over and to say, here are the things that everyone agrees can be used for training, that it is open material. And then at least that would allow freedom to do training on materials that are considered public domain.
Thank you. I have one final one for you. So, you mentioned a lot of open questions and things we should all be thinking about and working towards. If you were starting your career over today, where do you think you would see yourself trying to make the most impact and spending your time?
Honestly, I would be picking up a topic that I have been concerned about and mentioned earlier, and that's digital preservation. And the reason that I'm so concerned about this is that we've discovered how valuable digital content can be, not just for training AI agents, but although that's certainly one example. But the ability to coalesce information has often led to amazing discovery and invention. So I would be worried about losing digital information and therefore losing a lot of its value, which can be extracted partly with things like AI and large language models, but with other kinds of processing as well. The obvious example of this is health information. If we had the ability to examine large cohorts of health information, we might have a much better chance of discovering either causes of disease or mechanisms for combating it. And that's probably an argument you could make for a variety of other information as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Vint. We all enjoyed hearing from you, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you for letting me join you today. I appreciate that. I unfortunately have to jump on yet another call. My days are back-to-back calls, and I'm sure many of you people on this call are similarly affected. But thanks again for letting me join you. I appreciate it.